I'm DRutter, and today is April 16th, 2021, approximately 400 days after 2 weeks to flatten the curve here in British Columbia. Yes, we have been locked down for 10 full 40-day quarantines with no end in sight, despite the pandemic being over 12 months ago. Here in south central BC, there's a small town called Lytton, and because of its high ratio of Indigenous people, it was chosen to receive the Moderna so-called vaccine before the rest of Canada. When healthy people became sick and even died soon after taking the first shot, local family physician Dr. Hoff stepped forward to ask questions and was told to shut up or else. He courageously has not shut up and just did an explosive interview with an independent journalist, Laura Lynn Thompson. The interview is on Facebook, but experiencing heavy censorship and looks like it will be removed. I've copied the main segment here on alternative platforms with a link and credit back to Laura Lynn. My brief analysis will follow the interview. Please immediately spread this info far and wide. I believe it's happening all across Canada and likely the world, though I can only report what's going on here in my region. Here's the interview.
Dr. Hoff, thank you very much for being here. We understand now that you have written a letter. One of the things you start out your letter to Dear Dr. Henry, which is Dr. Bonnie Henry, the first dose of the Moderna vaccine has now been administered to some of my patients in the community of Lytton, BC. This began with the First Nations members of our community in mid-January 2021. 900 doses have now been administered. Will you tell me, Dr. Hoff, what has transpired and what brought you to such concern that you felt you needed to write an open letter to Dr. Bonnie Henry?
Yes, I'll tell you really the story. About a month ago, I expressed when all the news about the blood clots from the AstraZeneca virus and that sort of thing were coming into the news, and there were 12 countries in Europe that had discontinued it, and I just knew that this vaccine rollout was happening without any long-term safety data, and the number of cases of anaphylaxis showed us that the risks of it that were quoted by the pharmaceutical companies in proving their safety were definitely a vast understatement. And we could see that just with anaphylaxis right off the bat. In Lytton, Moderna quoted 1 in 100,000. We've had 2 in Lytton in the first 900 people vaccinated. So, I mean, we can see clearly that they fudged their numbers basically to prove the safety of their vaccines. But to get back to my story, I sent an email that I thought was a bit foolish to a group of the people involved in the vaccine rollout here, and these were pharmacists, nurses, doctors, just in our area. I think it went to 18 people, and I just said, with all these side effects appearing, shouldn't we perhaps just pause things for a while? Anyway, within 48 hours, I had a very stern rebuke from my superiors at the Interior Health Authority, who told me that I was guilty of causing vaccine hesitancy, and they were going to be reporting me to the College of Physicians and Surgeons of BC, and that I was forbidden from saying anything negative about the vaccine within our health facility. So I had been given a gag order. So initially I was a bit intimidated because, unfortunately many doctors are, because the colleges hold enormous authority to literally shut down your livelihood or to give enormous fines. So I was a bit intimidated, but as the week went on and I saw more and more people coming into my office with serious neurological problems, following and this was just the first shot of the vaccine, and we know that the second one gives much worse side effects, I became more and more angry about my gag order. And so I was told when I was in my reprimand that if I had any questions about the vaccine, that they needed to be addressed to the medical health officer responsible for the vaccine rollout for our area, and that's who I needed to be speaking to. So I wrote a letter with all my questions and concerns. And of course, my questions have no answers because this is an experiment and we don't know what the answers are. But anyway, I put them all in a letter, and I sent the letter off to this doctor who's the medical health officer, and to date have received no reply, which I suppose wasn't exactly it wasn't surprising.
Unexpected, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So after receiving no response from her, I thought, well, then I'm going to write to Dr. Bonnie Henry, who's our provincial health officer. So I thought, because I didn't expect a response from her either, that I would make it an open letter, and that I was so angry about being shut down, basically being gagged and threatened with punishment for speaking out about what I was seeing in my own patients, that I sent it as an open letter. And that's, I imagine, what you have.
Exactly. And is it also correct that that you have been invited to participate in some sort of Zoom call or a safety thing tomorrow afternoon?
Yes, yeah. So to my absolute astonishment, Dr. Bonnie Henry did respond. She had referred the matter to a vaccine safety specialist, who asked to have a meeting with me. And so that meeting is going to happen tomorrow afternoon. And so I'm just just trying to prepare myself to be able to speak the truth. And so what I'm telling people about is not some theory. This is what I've seen in my own patients. I've been a doctor to these patients for 28 years. And now 3 of them are disabled by this first vaccine. And it upsets me very much, because these people did not know that they were part of an experiment.
Right. So this is very alarming. And this is what we've been seeing, Dr. Hoff. And I just want to say again that I am so very grateful for you speaking out. And I do not understand why there is being a silencing of doctors who are just telling the truth from their expertise. And so I thank you for your courage in spite of what you are, facing or any repercussions. When you say that you've been a doctor to these patients for a long time, you know them, and also you've seen that one person has actually died, and I believe it was quite a few days after the vaccination, right?
Yes, that's correct. So in that person's case, there's no way of proving what they died from. This was a person who had COPD and was on one medication, which was a Ventolin puffer. So this person just complained to his wife that ever since he had the shot, he was short of breath all the time. And then eventually, 3 weeks after the shot, or in fact, it was 24 days to be precise, he was literally sitting on the side of the bed talking to his wife and just keeled over dead. So I don't know what he died from. Unfortunately, I wasn't on duty that week. An autopsy wasn't done. He was just buried or cremated or whatever happened to him. And so it was just odd. He had no history of heart disease or of strokes or anything else. It was his only. So that is an unknown. I just don't know if it was the vaccine.
Right, but I appreciate you raising the alarm, because these are things that should be investigated. They are also truths and facts. It's data that we can put forward. So your concern then also is that you're seeing some harms that are coming to other patients. What are the types of things you've seen?
Well, I think perhaps the most tragic of all of them is a very dear 38-year-old lady in our community who had her first shot of the COVID vaccine, and she was one of the people who had an anaphylactic reaction. So within 15 minutes, her tongue and her throat swelled up, and she felt like she couldn't breathe properly, and she developed itchy skin. And so she was treated for her anaphylaxis, and once she'd recovered, she went home. The next day found that she was literally so exhausted that for the next 3 weeks, she tells me that she literally slept till 5 o'clock in the evening every day for 3 weeks with a pounding headache. So then she started to improve a little bit after that. And then 1 week after her shot, she developed a Bell's palsy, which is a paralysis of half of your face. So she couldn't close her left eye. Her speech was slurred because it affects your tongue as well. It's hard to eat because you drool out of the side of your mouth. But what was most unusual is that Bell's palsy is not usually painful. but she had pain on the side of her face where this palsy was. So that is something different that I've never ever heard of a painful Bell's palsy. So she also, at the time that she got the Bell's palsy, just became severely dizzy. And so she's now almost 3 months since her vaccine and still cannot drive. She is so dizzy all the time with incessant headaches. The headaches aren't all the time, they're every day, but the main thing that disables her is the dizziness. And so her Bell's palsy improved to a point that she can actually now close both eyes. But when she blinks, only one eye doesn't blink properly. But so her Bell, we don't know if her facial paralysis will be permanent or not. But she has been off work since her shot in January, middle of January,
Dr.
with
Hoff,
no sign of any improvement. Yes.
right. Are you aware of which vaccine specifically that this poor woman took?
Yes. So all of my patients have had the Moderna vaccine.
Moderna. Okay.
Moderna, yes. That's the only one that's been given here.
So this is very difficult. And Dr. Hoff, isn't this, this has also been reported across the world in other vaccine adverse reaction publications that have said Bell's palsy and things like this are, they are occurring.
Yes, absolutely. And so, Bell's palsy is disfiguring, but it's not disabling. It's a very unfortunate thing because it often doesn't sometimes it'll fully recover. This young lady doesn't look as though hers is going to recover because for the last 3 weeks, there's been no improvement at all. So hers may well be permanent. Usually you see a steady improvement if it is going to improve.
Right. And so what are, you said there was several patients. What are the symptoms for the other patients?
Well, the others, yes. So another lady who is quite a lot older, she's 81 years old. She told me last week that she does not want to live anymore. She has so much pain since having that vaccine. And so her pain is in her shoulders and her head and her neck. And she just has incessant pain to the point that she just doesn't want to live anymore. Not only does she have this pain, but she has weakness in both arms. So this is not a stroke, because a stroke doesn't give you equal weakness on both sides. I don't know what this is. I don't know if it's something along the lines of multiple sclerosis. It certainly could be. Every one of my patients with neurological deficits is different. Everyone is completely different. So, but they're all neurological problems from the Moderna vaccine. So she told me that not only does she not want to live because of her incessant pain, but her hands are so weak that she can't even open a box of Kleenex tissues. And so she is just miserable and wished that she had never had the shot. Unfortunately, a lot of these vaccines were never tested on elderly and never tested on people with multiple comorbidities. So they sort of chose relatively healthy people to test them on so that they could prove how safe they were.
Wow. Dr. Hoff, it's so alarming, and thank you for telling us. Sometimes we can read these stories in the publications that come out, but to actually speak to somebody who knows that this is happening. So, was there another patient, or could I do want to know?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So the third one who literally also has what looks like it will be a long-term disability, and we can't really. So we're almost 3 months out, so it's maybe too soon to say it's. But when there's just no improvement, it certainly looks like it's going to be. So he's
Right.
the fellow whose only side effect is in the arm where he received the vaccination. So he just has incessant pain in that arm and weakness. So a very weak hand grip on that side. And what was also most peculiar in him, so his is not a pain on both sides of his body. It's just the arm that was vaccinated is just painful all the time. But just a neuromuscular weakness, just a weak hand grip where he certainly wouldn't be able to open a jar or anything like that. But what was odd with him is he had these neurological symptoms of weakness and pain, and also actually paresthesias, which is tingling in his fingers. But about 6 weeks after his vaccination, that arm just suddenly swelled up from about the elbow downwards. So swelling is not usually a neurological sign. That's usually a sign of either a lymphatic problem or a vascular problem. So in all of these people, their side effects are sort of evolving. In other words, there's some process has been started that I cannot identify. These people need to have MRIs and a whole lot of expensive investigations to try and sort out what is going on, but each one is distinctly different. I have other patients who say they can't sleep since having their vaccine 2 months ago, or their feet are sore. It's just a huge variety of things, but except for the fellow with the swollen arm, they're all neurological problems from the Moderna vaccine.
Right. And so you asked Dr. Bonnie Henry some very pointed questions. You said, are these considered normal and acceptable long-term side effects for gene modification therapy? Judging by medical reports from around the world, our Lytton experience is not unusual. And I guess I'm gathering that what you're saying is, if this is what we're seeing, and I think later in your letter, you're asking, is this not cause perhaps for, some reassessment of if we're going to proceed?
Exactly. And so the questions that I asked her, no one knows the answers for, because this vaccine was rolled out with no long-term safety studies at all. This is an experiment. And so, of course, she can't answer that question because no one knows what the long-term, this is the RNA and DNA therapies have never been done on people before. So it was sort of a difficult question for her, because knowing that there's no answer, no yet. We're just seeing it now, basically. And so I was just saying, basically implying that these are unacceptable side effects. And the other thing that I mentioned in my letter, that normally when you're doing a research study testing out a new therapy, if it's shown that the therapy is very harmful, it is normally a principle of basic ethics that you stop the study. You don't carry on harming people just to sort of see how bad it gets. You normally discontinue the clinical trial if harm is shown. And that was what I challenged her with in my letter is, isn't this unethical to continue this on without knowing what we're up against?
Exactly. I just thank you for asking these questions and for being so courageous as to ask. It does seem that doctors across Canada, Doug Ford has just said that as a premier, any politician that's going to go against these medical authorities, it's political suicide. So we are at the mercy of these people, Dr. Hoff. And you heard Dr. Hodkinson in his video today. He says, this is a major crisis of unparalleled proportion.
Yes. Yeah, no, so it unfortunately, most of the management of this pandemic makes no sense, including this vaccine rollout. And so the last bit of medical information that might be useful to your viewers is that we've now discovered that there are 3 senses that are lost with COVID. And the first is the sense of smell, and the second is the sense of taste, and the third is common sense. It has completely disappeared.
Right. That's really good. Yes. Smell, taste, and common sense. I appreciate that.
They're gone. Right. Yeah.
Well, thank you for a little laugh in the middle of it, because this is such an alarming thing to so many people. Anyone that dares to investigate and to go a little bit deeper than anything we're hearing on CBC, CTV, and Global. And sir, I dare say that nobody from CBC, CTV, or Global is going to be calling you and saying, Dr. Hoff, we understand that you've done, this open letter to Dr. Bonnie Henry, and you're citing these things. And it's true that it's you work amongst a lot of Indigenous people as well, right?
I do, and it grieved me greatly that the people, this is an experiment, and it grieved me that the first people that the government chose to sort of experiment on was the elderly and the First Nations people. Now, I know there were healthcare providers involved, in that as well. And I was offered this vaccine and I said, no, thank you. I would like to be part of the unvaccinated control group in this experiment. But it grieved me that, well, all of the patients that I have that now have long-term, ongoing neurological side effects are all First Nations people, because they were the people who got it first, and the rest are just getting it now.
Wow, you know what, Dr. Hoff, on this program, I sounded the alarm about that. I said, does that seem right? I even spoke with a First Nations woman who was not supportive of this at all, at all. But then the political correctness, kind of came in, and the, the way that they're presenting it, and all of a sudden they were rolling it out up there. It seems wrong to, like, why would they do that? I'm sorry, but I cry foul on that, and I think something's very wrong with using certain people groups to be test cases for this. And I thought it was wrong, 2 months ago when I heard that this was going to happen. So I appreciate you talking about that. One of the things you also say that you've noticed that the provincial vaccine injury reporting form, which was clearly designed for conventional vaccines, does not even have any place to report vaccine injuries of the nature and severity that we are seeing from this new mRNA therapy. So could you explain to us lay people what that means?
Yes. So when this vaccine rollout started, I was emailed the form that you have to fill out for reporting vaccine injuries. And so this is a 9-page form. It is a very onerous thing. I found it literally takes almost half an hour to fill it out. I'm a fee-for-service physician, which means I'm self-employed and I only get paid for each bit of work that I do. And there is no remuneration for this half an hour of work. But not only that, so in other words, that's a huge disincentive for doctors to not even report the injuries, because it's a lot of work for no money. Right. You're working for free. So, and nobody likes working for no money. I mean, we've all got to put bread on the table. But the other thing that I found concerning is all of my patients have neurological injuries. I mean, except for the ones that were anaphylaxis. And there are neurological injuries, and there's no place on this form for neurological injuries, because this is a whole new ball game. There's never been a vaccine like this before, and to even call it a vaccine is really not true, because it's gene therapy. A vaccine normally has part of a microorganism in it, either a virus or a bacteria in some altered form that doesn't make you sick, but that will induce an antibody reaction. So this does not have any part of any disease organism in it. This is a gene that is put into your body to induce antibodies to the coronavirus spike protein. And of course, the concern with that, and this doesn't touch on what I've said in my letter, the concern with inducing antibodies to the coronavirus spike protein is that there are 20 types of tissues in the human body that have spike proteins. So the potential is that this so-called vaccine could trigger an autoimmune response against some part of your own body. So in all of these women that are now having miscarriages, who have had one of these COVID vaccines, and there's hundreds of them around the world that I don't know why they're vaccinating pregnant women. I mean, at that age, your risk of COVID is almost zero. But anyway, there are now hundreds of miscarriages caused by this. And so the only mechanism that seems to be apparent of why this vaccine would cause a miscarriage is that these women now have antibodies to their placenta. In other words, they are now vaccinated against all future pregnancies because because the placenta has a spike protein, and they now have antibodies to a spike protein. So the repercussions of this are huge, and it's an experiment, and we have no idea what is going to become of this. We don't know what other autoimmune. I fully expect in my patients the neurological effects are autoimmune, which is why they're evolving and changing. But I think this has a very high chance of causing permanent infertility in women of childbearing age by literally um, giving them a vaccine against having a placenta, that as soon as the placenta is formed, they will miscarry every time.
Oh my word. You know, it's so shocking, and it's not unlike what I've been hearing from other doctors sounding the alarm. And Dr. Hoff, you sound like somebody who was not about to make a problem for no reason. You've been going about in a little town of Lytton. It's not a huge place. It's in British Columbia, beautiful little community, and you're just doing what you do best, caring for people, upholding your first do no harm oath, Hippocratic oath, and
Absolutely.
now what you're finding is that you're seeing things that are extremely alarming, and you dare to say something, and you get the pushback, and you've had to go past that, and and you're so upset about this, and rightly so. I think what you're describing and what we're seeing is very problematic. And so, I'm just so very grateful that you've done this. Do you think that anyone is going to listen? Will there be other doctors that will be as courageous to speak up?
I don't know. Unfortunately, the colleges hold a lot of power over doctors, and so most doctors are too afraid to speak up. Um, but I'm hoping that others will gain courage. I mean, I don't know what will happen to me through all of this. I was told to shut up, and I refused to. In fact, it made me very angry, and made me more determined to. I don't think I'd be doing this if I hadn't been told I wasn't allowed to. Except, it was just so wrong. To suppress truth at the expense of people's lives is just completely wrong. And I have devoted the last 28 years to looking after the people in my practice, and to see them now part of this horrible experiment and injured like this, and they were just unsuspecting people. And with so many of these people, I found out about their injuries by accident. They would come in for something else, and I would say, how are you getting on, and how did it go with the COVID shot, and then they would tell me, that they, whatever it is that they're suffering, and with some of them it's just tingling down one side of their body or something else. It's some minor thing that's not going to disable them, but clearly there's some neurological process that has started, and I don't know what it is. I'll tell you, I think it might be MS. Only the reason why I'm telling you this, I have a patient who got MS from a flu shot about 20 years ago. And he started off by getting a very vivid transverse myelitis. He got his flu shot in the morning. He came into the emergency room in the evening, and I saw him there, and he said he had this tremendous burning pain in his buttock extending down the leg, and I didn't know what was going on. And he said, well, he just had this flu shot that morning, but the skin, it wasn't shingles, the skin was normal. I didn't know what it was. And so I sent him off to a neurologist who diagnosed it as a transverse myelitis, which has now developed into MS. So he unfortunately decided to have one of these COVID shots, and his MS had sort of settled down. I mean, he still battles a lot. He's been completely disabled ever since that shot 20 years ago, but it was sort of under control. But as soon as he had this COVID shot, his transverse myelitis flared within about a day. He had this huge flare up, right back to square one. And so that's what makes me think, because we know what his diagnosis is, he's had all the MRI scans, he's had all the investigations, that this really could be something like multiple sclerosis.
In summary, Dr. Hoff's opinion is Moderna vastly understated the risks of their product, for example, by not testing it sufficiently on elderly or sick people. Any questions are silenced by officials within the government. Dr. Hoff was forbidden to voice his concerns and accused of causing vaccine hesitation. Most doctors are afraid to speak up and lose their career. As an ex-nurse, I know that well myself. I'm grateful to professionals like Dr. Hoff for risking their careers to bring us the truth from the front lines. What he's seeing is widespread anaphylactic shock, Bell's palsy, autoimmune disorders, neurological damage, terrible neurological damage, miscarriages, sterility, and, in a small town, 1 death, although that death hasn't been conclusively linked to Moderna's experimental gene therapy. The effects evolve and worsen as weeks and months go by, many patients still progressing and worsening, and it appears much like MS. Each shot multiplies the damage done. If this vaccine rollout was an experiment, legally it would have to be halted immediately given what is happening. But because it's not officially an experiment, it continues. Most of the adverse effects aren't even being recorded or reported. Thank you so much for helping me share this suppressed information.